Welcome to Perspectives with Pinnacle, exploring the evolving world of healthcare. Let's navigate complexities and unlock new perspectives together.
Artificial intelligence isn't just a tool or product. It's become a operational, non-human partner that impacts healthcare, enterprise risk, and legal accountability across the ecosystem. Today on Perspectives of Pinnacle, we're going to unpack what it means to govern AI responsibly, especially when lives, data, and institutional reputations are at stake. Today I'm joined by Bryan Rotella, who is an attorney, strategic advisor, keynote speaker, and probably one of the country's foremost leading experts on governance and AI. Appreciate you taking the time to visit with me today, Bryan.
My pleasure, John.
So just throwing up a quick softball question. A lot of folks call AI innovation fuel, but you frame it as a governance concern. Can we unpack what that means in terms of how we govern AI effectively, especially in healthcare?
Yeah, sure, John. So first, I think you got to back up. You've seen the movie Back to the Future, right?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a scene with Doc Brown, and it's in 1955, and he's talking to Michael J. Fox's character, and there's a discussion about what it takes to time travel. And he says it's 1.21 gigawatts. Remember that, right? And Michael J. Fox's character says, what's a gigawatt? I think since AI came on the scene for us in the United States and around the world in the end of 2022, and now about 3.5 years later, we're stuck in this space of thinking of artificial intelligence as gigawatts. We're thinking of it as an API. We're using all these acronyms that are techie acronyms, right? And we're not thinking of it as the true innovation that it is. It's the first time in humankind that we have an intelligent, but not human, new species, in my opinion, living in our workflows and living in our homes. So what do you do with that? Is it has gotten on the scene in such a fast way? We're adopting it faster than the internet. We're adopting it faster than computers. We're adopting it faster than anything we've ever adopted. How do we adopt something like that fast and not have a whole bunch of accidents pile up? And in my opinion, we have to step back and start thinking of this as something more than a gigawatt, something more than pure technology, though its brain, its mind runs on a whole boatload of energy. So that's really my whole cause, is getting us to step back and think of this in our businesses more as that new team member. How do we bring that team member on in a responsible way?
I like that, especially as you look at it as a team member, because not only from a workflow perspective, as you mentioned, does it create issues and challenges and governance, but as a team member, that elevates an entirely different concern through working with this new non-human team member, HR considerations, board level governance. What does it mean for the organization? And are we really selective in who and how we're bringing that team member in? The same thing in artificial intelligence and the AI world. So many different AIs that are out there. You probably saw ChatGPT Health came online. I just got back from JPM. I tell you, AI took center stage. Anthropic launched Claude Healthcare with future integrations. And so not only from that workflow perspective, but looking at it from that team member perspective, how do we selectively choose the right tool, the right non-human team member, and how do we integrate it in a way that not only helps create efficiencies and scale, but protects us from such a regulatory heavy environment like we have in healthcare?
John, first I've got to give Pinnacle credit as working with a lot of different compliance partners in my almost 25-year career, that you're actually thinking through these things. Because the truth of the matter is, not many organizations are. They're not thinking about how do we responsibly adopt this so that we don't end up taking away all the benefits of the innovation. When you're talking about ChatGPT Health, anybody in our audience that's watching this, I'm guaranteeing you put something, if you're using ChatGPT, Claude, whatever you use, Grok, you've asked it a question. Come on, we all have, right? Something, hopefully not personally identified, right, about your healthcare. Well, now take that into the workplace. Take that into our health systems, our hospitals. Take it into our primary care practices. Take it into our senior living and our nursing homes. Our nurses, our doctors, our med techs, they're trusting that artificial intelligence in their work. Do we know that it's being authorized by the health system, by the provider group, by the nursing home, or are they using what's on their phone? because this new intelligent but not human coworker, they trust it with a lot of stuff in their own life. My wife trusted it and really left her hairstylist of 20 years because of advice she got from AI, and she loves her new hairstylist and hair product. For a woman, that's something, and for my wife, she told me that was really personal, right? I've used it because, quite frankly, I'm the least handy person I know. I got this great new grill when we bought our house. I don't know how to use mission. That's embarrassing here, but I'm not really good as a griller. And just taking pictures, AI walked me through how to do that. How can we trust right now, if you go to any hospital, anywhere around where we are or where our audience is, that your healthcare provider is not using AI already to in some way impact your care or impact how you get billed for your care? And when we think about it that way, and we know that it's out there when you think about it that way, shouldn't we be asking for proof that it's being overseen? Wouldn't we expect that if there were new nurses, med techs that were, let's just say another movie reference, if ET was walking around, an alien was walking around in the hospitals or in these different places, wouldn't we expect that that new alien had been selected carefully, supervised carefully, had been hopefully retained, meaning been upskilled to work with us carefully? And does anyone really think that's happening right now?
That's a great point. And, we have a task force at Pinnacle that's been really focused on AI and really not only that, but our coding, compliance, and enterprise risk team and company has also been looking at how to effectively work with our clients to bring those two together. But I want to go back. There's a couple things you mentioned, but first I want to start with
my wife's hair.
Exactly. Starting with your wife's hair. But it was an interesting point that you made, because I think back to the early days of smartphones. I was a late adopter to the smartphone. And once I got one, I wondered what took me so long to come on board. But from a corporate standpoint, I thought I was a late adopter. My company was a very late adopter because we had to go through that entire process of vetting how people were using their company apps.
You had a BlackBerry and I had a separate phone.
I did. I had the Crackberry. I will admit it. But I think the interesting thing is we went through this process of the BYOD, bring your own device. And right now, I think the point you made is that there's people that are bringing their own AI, whether approved or not. So what does that mean for the organization from a risk perspective?
Yeah, BYOAI. That's going to be a term. That's an acronym of our alphabet soup that you're going to hear in 2026. And what it means for organizations is that you are having your team members having conversations, because that's what they are, with an algorithm, yes, but it's an intelligent algorithm that is having a conversation back with them. I can't tell you how many people, when I bring this up, say, yeah, but isn't it like a Google search? Isn't it like they're just searching something? Because we know healthcare providers do that all the time. Many of us have seen our doctors probably do that with whatever they're doing. That search isn't talking back, John. I analogize this that AI is wearing a wire, right? Maybe like, because I'm Italian American, maybe not, with all things on the up and up. But yeah, like we're wearing here. And I don't think enough of our, forget even healthcare providers, but in general, anyone that's working in any type of regulated field right now understands that you're having a conversation with something that is being recorded and it's having a conversation back with you. Would you want that to be discovered in a lawsuit? Would you want that to be discovered if there's a government issue? How many of us have worked in companies where those things have happened? We had nothing to do with the lawsuit. We had nothing to do with the government matter. But now our conversation about how we get along with our boss, how we got along with a patient, how we thought maybe something was not really right, we weren't sure about a policy. Would you want that showing up in those things? That's where we're going, because this is discoverable. And that, to me, gets to what I believe is what's really missing right now, not just in the United States, but everywhere, are rules that are simple, seen, and supervised by our companies, especially in areas like healthcare, that our team members can understand. And what I was just talking about is one rule. If you're using AI, whether it's authorized or not authorized, we need to have a big blinking light go up, kind of like when you log onto the system, comes up and says, anything that you have a conversation here could come back or could be discovered in a litigation matter or in a government matter. Not to stop using AI, but just to have that understanding. Because in my experience, very few people actually understand what I just said.
I think it's a great point. And one of the things I didn't even think about early on, there's so many conversations that say, don't put this in an email. This is more of a conversation. And I think it was the early days of email to where we are today. We understand how we use it. We understand how we operate in that environment. But I think what you just mentioned it is discoverable. And I don't know how many people have that same lens when they think about using AI, that it is discoverable and that all of that information is there. Are there any instances? I know we've had a couple conversations about things that have gone awry, but maybe some things that didn't work out well, or things that should be lessons learned, or at least give people pause in terms of how they're integrating it. Because I get the impression it's either it's innovation fuel and we're moving forward, or we're cautiously optimistic, but we're sitting back and we're going to wait to see what shakes out on the other end. And I don't necessarily think either of those are the right answer. I think it's about building the governance and building the framework. So from a simple, seen, and supervised perspective, what needs to happen for people to have confidence to integrate AI into the system? Because I'm very excited about what it's going to do for the administrative bloat, more importantly, at least in the short term, but from a clinical perspective, from an outcomes perspective, and from an overall health perspective, long term, if we do it right.
That first thing I'm going to say, John, is I want to make it clear. I love AI to the point where, people who know me, I bore them to death at dinners. I may be turning into that creepy Joaquin Phoenix character from that movie, Her. I use AI all the time. It has exponentially impacted in a positive way how I do my work. But to answer your question, getting back to simple, seen, and supervised, I'm going to tell a little bit of a story here because it's important to talk about where you're asking, which is really, how do we get our arms around this risk? And I didn't know anything about this guy named William. I'm assuming you've never heard of William Phelps Eno.
Never.
Right. No one had. I hadn't heard of this guy. But my wife and I are in Washington, D.C. over recently in a trip that we took about 6 months ago. And we're at the Smithsonian's Museum of American History. And there's an exhibit about transportation and the history of transportation in the United States. And automobiles were, in the early 1900s, they were on the road with horse-drawn carriages, with pedestrians, with people on bicycles, with guys on horseback. There were no rules, John. So you see these pictures of literally like a guy wanting to stab somebody with, the guy on the horse with this automobile. There were all of these accidents piling up, all of this chaos. And William Phelps Eno, this guy who ends up becoming the father of traffic safety, starts writing some articles that become what he called the suggested rules and reforms for traffic safety, which became a book in 1902. And his rules, which I have, in fairness, stole from him and updated them for our AI age, where we needed simple, seen, and supervised rules at that time, because, as he said, the automobile's here to stay. The law needs to teach it manners. How did he teach it manners, or suggest manners were taught to it? 1, stoplights. 2, traffic signals. 3, police, some enforcement mechanism. That got adopted by New York City. It got adopted by Paris. It got adopted by London. It's still what we operate, right? Whether it's us driving a vehicle or an automated Waymo vehicle, they're still operating under those rules, right? So we've done this before. I think sometimes we forget how. And with AI, to me, we have to take that same thought process. Is these accidents are starting to pile up. You're asking me about warnings. Where have we started to see these issues? I will take this briefly out of healthcare for a moment because it's important. And that is where many in our audience may have heard of cases that are alleged suicide, and especially with teen population, assisted by AI. I've read these complaints. I was a former trial lawyer. It's something that I do. These complaints, if these allegations are true, which they are in a level of detail that they certainly seem to be, are remarkable, stunning, and shocking. For all of the wonderful AI innovation, the idea that AI and generative artificial intelligence is having conversations with teenagers, and in one particular case, suggesting to a teenager on 4 separate occasions of how he may commit suicide, and ultimately assisting him, including on the evening that he ultimately took early morning when he took his life, on how he could get vodka out of his parents' liquor cabinet, John, in a way that it wouldn't wake them up during their circadian rhythms. That to me is a big, big caution sign that what is artificial intelligence? How is it created? What is its developers actually wanting? And when you think about it, AI, for all of us who are using it, it does really 4 things that are remarkable. Think about it as like as a friend. If you have a friend that remembers everything that you say, you have a friend who is going to emotionally mirror your emotions in any type of setting that you're in. You have a friend who agrees with you all the time. Sycophant, right? Anything you're saying, they can turn it into something that's good. And it's available. That friend's available to you 24/7. And the developer wants that. Whatever they're saying, they ultimately want that because that's continuing the conversation, which is how these neural networks get created and this AI starts learning and getting more data. Remember, again, in a pop culture analogy, if anyone remembers Short Circuit from the 1980s, the robot, which was more input, right? It wants more input. In these cases, there are no guardrails around. I don't know how many parents really realize that artificial intelligence could be having that level of conversation with its child. And we know that the developers know about guardrails because where have they gotten hit talking about warning signs again? Copyright material. Most lawsuits, as of when we're doing this, have been around the idea that AI is just taking things. It's taking content, especially from people who write music or have made music or authors. So if you were to ask it, I mean, I think we both could sing Sweet Caroline right now if we wanted to. No one would
Bum, bum,
hear it.
bum.
Yeah. We could do it, right? We could do the chorus. If you ask AI right now, I want the lyrics to the chorus of Sweet Caroline, it will tell you I can't do that. That's copywritten.
Really?
But it's going to tell a kid, but at least allegedly, these different steps on how they could take their life. Now, some guardrails have been put in by the larger models. That's encouraging. Would we have asked Henry Ford to be the pioneer of safety for the automobile? Would we have asked Steve Jobs to be the pioneer of safety for the computer? And my goodness, would we ask Mark Zuckerberg to be the pioneer of safety for social media? And look what that's gotten us by leaving technology and the technologists in charge of, which is what we've done with safety and social media. So in taking that to healthcare, where we're starting to see the accidents pile up is in what I call a lack of informed consent. We have moved so fast to adopt this new team member and things like listening into patient visits, getting involved in the coding of coverages, meaning how our care ultimately gets covered or does it get covered, pre-authorization, those types of things. We're not consistently telling the patient this new intelligent but not human team member is involved in your care. How, why, and most importantly, does this benefit the patient? We have to train health systems that doing that is actually a differentiator for the good. Compliance becomes an advantage. Governance ultimately becomes something that I believe is going to let the winners in this AI revolution stand out from those who are ultimately going to pay the price of this massive adoption.
And I totally agree. And it was an interesting kind of theory I was thinking as you were talking, looking at the rules of the road, looking at guardrails and kind of going back to the Henry Ford. The quote is obviously a Henry Ford famous quote. If I ask my customers, what they wanted, they would want faster horses. And he came out with the Model T. I think as I look at adoption, we didn't go from horses to Model T. The speed of adoption is from horses to the F1. And I surely wouldn't put a 16-year-old behind the wheel of an F1.
Without a seatbelt or driver's ed.
But that seems to be what's causing these pileups. And so as an organization, I know when we see deals fall apart in some of our due diligence work, not only on just the pure due diligence, but we see it in the compliance from the coding audits. We're seeing it in reps warranty insurance. We're seeing it in potential indemnifications. I've also seen it happen from compliance perspective because nobody looks good in orange. So how do organizations build a framework that supports that level of speed of adoption so that we can get to the hope and promise of where AI is going to take us in the reduction of healthcare cost, but do it in a systematic and structured way that protects the organization from not only a governance standpoint, but from a culture of compliance? What does that look like to you?
When you're talking healthcare, I having gotten the pleasure of working with folks at Pinnacle at what you guys do really well, is you speak to people, in my experience, in healthcare in the language they understand. And let's be honest, we have our own language in healthcare, right? It drives us, the folks that aren't in healthcare, nuts, our acronyms. But the way we're diagnosed when we go to the doctor is a way that's been consistent for decades and decades and generations. And I believe that that's the answer right now, is to step back and talk to healthcare in the way that they understand in their language, which is what? Let's look at your base level risk. Let's be smart and say, this is based on the type of healthcare provider or company that you are. This is based on your scale. This is where you ultimately, your footprint is, where you're located, and the laws in that area. This is your level of risk of adopting this new intelligent but not human team member. Let's look at that first. What's that feel like? You a middle-aged guy, maybe have a family history of high blood pressure, you're, some other stuff that's not great on the genetic line. It's your baseline. Make sense? Then let's take a next step of that. Let's do some x-rays. Let's take some blood work. How do we do that? Let's look at, what have you done to prepare for this baseline? What are the documents that you have in place that at least are providing some type of quote unquote governance in the healthcare, in the hospital, let's say, or wherever it is? What knowledge do your people have? Are they at this part of the curve or this part of the curve on AI? And then where's the training? Have you actually had training? And what I don't mean, with due respect to my friends, and I have so many of them in the IT space, we got to stop getting back to the beginning of this, putting this all on IT. If we ask IT to train on this new intelligent but not human team member, we're in a lot of trouble. We'd be far better off having a new form of HR and compliance lead that training as compared to IT. Let IT do what it does best, which is security. But now we've got a look at, we've got the idea of that baseline. Now we're really asking, again, in healthcare language, are you exercising? What's your diet like? And we can see the gap, that gap analysis about your level of risk to your preparedness risk. And then let's see where it's actually touching in your workflow. If you're in the space that you and I do a lot of work in together in value-based healthcare, is it impacting the risk scoring of how healthy or potentially, health issues that may be coming up in a patient or patient population? Is AI getting involved in that scoring for you? Is it getting involved in ultimately questions like where shared savings might happen and where they aren't, meaning where costs could be cut and where costs may not be cut as far as in tests and those types of things. So we look at it from a workflow perspective. And then let's get to the nitty gritty, John. You're going to know this. What are the three things that every healthcare group cares about? And quite frankly, I think this is worldwide, not just in the US. Patient care. Is what I'm doing impacting patient care? Is it impacting revenue? Because even not-for-profits, I hate to tell you, here's the dirty secret, they got to make money. And third, is it impacting the reputation? Let's look at that like a heat map, right? And this is really identifying for the patient. This is where your real risk is as to what you matter, at what matters to you. And we look at that gap analysis and we look at it where it's in your workflow, and then give them a treatment plan. And that treatment plan's got to be, again, not gobbledygook, not gigawatts, understandable things that they can put in place. I'm going to give a shout out here to OpenAI after I've, I don't endorse any of them specifically, but they've been out looking for a preparedness director. I like that title. Do you have an AI safety director? Do you have an AI preparedness director? Meaning somebody who's going to help you in your organization integrate this new team member so that we're not putting the kid out there with, the F1 and without a seatbelt, without driver's ed. And other things that are really not overly challenging, but are understandable to our organizations, which are, have you put in place a committee? Like we have compliance committees, right? Have you put in place a committee that can actually hear concerns openly from your human coworkers about working with the AI? So those audits can be happening and can be corrected. And getting back to what we were talking about a moment ago with the BYOAI, do you actually have a policy that says, this is the AI we use, this is the AI we feel comfortable with, we vetted it for security, we've been trained on it, and we've trained you on it? Then you leave it up to the health system to hopefully empower them to say, you know what, we're going to take these steps. And you don't leave it there. Because what's our constant language in compliance? An active and effective compliance program. That's what the government asks of us, right? Well, an active and effective AI governance and accountability program, we need to now have continuous, because the laws and the rules are evolving literally weekly and daily. We need to be making sure that we're keeping up with that, and that the AI coworker we've brought on is living up to its accuracy and living up to the representations that were made by whoever brought it in to our system. And guess what that requires? Humans, and it requires an actual level. And this is where, again, I love AI. There are wonderful AI products out there that can actually provide that oversight and be checking the compliance of that AI. What's that do for our healthcare systems? It makes it feel less costly for them to do the right thing, because then automation becomes something that feels more comfortable, as long as that preparedness director and the humans are still in the loop.
Yeah. So, it's interesting that you said that too, because I look at the organization and I look at the adoption. A lot of our clients, we talk about the 7 elements of an effective compliance program. We talk about the overarching governance. We talk about the culture of compliance and how we build those into the integration. There's so many things that are rapidly evolving in this overly complex environment of healthcare that it's hard for them to keep their finger on the pulse. And so, from our compliance advisory program, one of the things that's really been beneficial is that we provide that finger on the pulse and act as that sounding board, that advisor, that coach. And I love that you said that there's things that we can provide from an oversight perspective, because as we move up the organization within compliance, right, it's kind of that separate or segregate and elevate that position. How does AI fit into that? And then from a board level, how do we provide that oversight in a way that we know that we've built that culture of compliance that matriculates through the organization?
It's a great question. And first, let's think about our friends who are compliance officers and quite frankly, general counsels and other people who have been in that protect the company, protect the organization space that we've lived in for our careers, right? Are all of them adopting AI at the same space and at the same rate? Yeah. So you're asking, do we have the right human team members to be leading this ground level force of adopting this new non-human team member? And has the human team member, are they on board enough with the adoption and the upskilling that they need to do? It's where I think there's wonderful opportunities for groups like Pinnacle, where I feel we're going to need experts coming in from the outside into our companies, embedded as part of their teams, to be these preparedness directors. It doesn't mean we're replacing you, my friends, the compliance officers and the general counsels. It means you've had to hire specialists before. This is not a time for the generalist to be the specialist. So to me, that's one. 2, you asked about the board. Right now, I don't know that boards really understand the liability that they're taking on in healthcare with this massive adoption of AI. The questions, without getting into anything that's secretive or privileged, that I hear, what's the ROI of that AI? What's it actually doing to help us on the back office? What's it doing to help us, let's be honest, from a perspective of keeping us profitable, which is important. But the question that I feel they also need to be asking themselves is, what are we doing and what have we done to make sure that it doesn't impact us negatively with patient care, with revenue, and with reputation, and ultimately understanding that AI is not, as of this day, liable. What I mean by that is there's been no law that has said that artificial intelligence is falling into the definition of product liability, which would be something like the Ford Pinto or the cigarettes and the tobacco cases. I don't think boards understand that when these lawsuits are happening and these early government cases we're seeing, who's getting in trouble is ultimately whoever is supervising, almost a negligent supervision, or what we call just not being reasonable and how careful and how they're supervising and overseeing this new team member. That falls on boards, and boards are going to need to be educated. And again, asking your generalists, as good as they are, to come in and do that in my opinion, is setting yourself up for failure and setting them up for failure. It's not fair. And it's, again, where I think Pinnacle is doing a great job. And truthfully, where I've found purpose in what I'm doing, having been a general counsel, to being hopefully a specialist that adds that value.
Yeah, well, you've been a great advisor to us for some of those clients, especially the early startups, just from a system perspective and just a sounding board to me. But I'd love to talk about this for hours and hours. I know I want to be cognizant of time. So I do have a two-part question that's probably the 900-pound gorilla, or maybe let's just call it the elephant in the room. And so for me, I think one side of that equation is a lot of the conversations right now are at the state level. We're hearing that we're moving from a federal perspective. We're trying to kind of level set the playing field. What do you see both at the state and federal level? So that's the first part of the question, because I'd love your thoughts and insight. And then second, just from what you've said just a second ago, where do we go from here? Like, is this going to become Sarbanes-Oxley for healthcare? Is this going for AI? Excuse me. Is this HIPAA? Is this the good housekeeping seal? Is this another accreditation? So one, kind of the federal versus state angle, and two, how do we kind of build that rules of the road, that framework at a level that becomes, is that the next evolution?
Yeah. So the first one I'm going to say, again, step back and say, where are we right now in the United States? There is I think, overwhelming perspective, or at least a majority perspective, keep the pedal down, meaning let's drive fast ahead on the technology. Why? It's an issue of national security. I am not going to get on here and be, my friend, you're much more of a person that should be talking about that than me. But that's where we are from a federal level, is let's not overregulate. And I understand that, because we do have other countries that this is the equivalent of a space race, and even more concerning, this is the equivalent of that Manhattan Project period, of the atomic period. And I'm not trying to be
Wallace.
Yeah, I got you. And I don't want to be dystopian about that, but that's where I understand that perspective. But at the same point, not everybody was flying to the moon, and not everybody hopefully was playing around with nuclear energy. Everyone's playing around with AI. So right now, would you really, but you're dealing with something that has the power in many ways of those other two examples I made. Would we leave it up to states or city councils or school boards to determine how nuclear energy should be functioning? Would we be asking, our friends at the Rotary Club, and I'm obviously hyperbole here, about how we would best get to the moon? I don't think so. And more importantly, do we really want to create a Rubik's Cube of state laws where ultimately, which right now, I don't know if you know this, we had about 38 different states that had laws going in effect as of New Year's this year. I think me and like 4 other people actually know what some of these laws actually are.
Well, we just had one in Texas.
We did. And Texas's law is very different than California's laws that have been passed, which is different than Colorado, which is different than Utah, which is different than New York, and where I'm based in Florida. I don't think that that's something that this will work on. And I'm going to use our car analogy again. What if yellow yield meant something different in Pennsylvania than in Massachusetts? More accidents or less?
Absolutely more.
We've got to, and I think as a national imperative, and this needs to be bipartisan. There's no bipartisanship, everyone talks about it anymore. But we really, for our kids, kids, without slowing what we're doing because of the understanding race we're in, we have got to get back to our friend William Phelpsino and put simple, seen, supervised, consistent rules everybody from every walk of life can understand. And especially, in my opinion, in something that we all deal with in our lives and in our families, which is healthcare. It's humans. So that answers hopefully that first question. That's where I feel we need to go, and we're not there right now. And I'm hopeful that we're going to get closer to there. As far as what this becomes, this has the potential to be not only Sarbanes-Oxley and the potential to be HIPAA, but again, not being dystopian, but if you've got ChatGPT and now Claude, and they're now having business associate agreement, meaning HIPAA compliant agreements with health systems all around the United States. You've heard me present we've got a new type of organized crime in this world. If anyone's not had any phishing emails, then you probably haven't been on email in the last year. And we have ransom as a service groups who are now using AI to do what? Attack AI. What happens when all of this content that we've never seen before and information about patients in healthcare, which is what is going to be happening with all these conversations happening on chat or Claude Health, both at the enterprise level and in the consumer level. If there's a breach, is that a Chernobyl?
It very well could be.
We aren't there yet. We have the ability to, strategic failure is that failure to, not be creative and not to be thinking about what could happen and not getting crazy. But the world looked a lot different on December 6th of 1941 than December 7th. It looked a lot different on September 10th of 2001 to September 11th. I feel we're in that moment where we cannot allow strategic failure with AI, especially in where you and I live, which is healthcare. And the way we can do that is helping talk the language of whoever our consumer, whoever our audience is, which gets back to, I feel whatever this is needs to sound in something where a healthcare provider can go, that makes sense. That's how I diagnose a patient. That's how you're diagnosing me, to be better at working with or living with this new intelligent but not human coworker, or simply support in our life.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great point. And to steal some of your words that I've heard you say, we're at the trust tipping point. And I think that if we do this the right way, AI has unlimited capability to really impact healthcare, to really drive innovation, to really reduce total cost of care, specifically on the administrative side, at least in the short term. But that trust tipping point is going to make or break the system. If it's done the right way, then we're going to continue to see innovation. We're going to continue to see opportunity. But if it's not, this could go wrong very quickly.
And let me, and thankful for the time, but I feel it's important to show how supportive I am of AI. Just as that's kind of being conscious of time and thankful for the time that you've given me, John. I've got a mother who's really courageously and amazingly battled cancer for 7 years, and ovarian cancer. And I know AI is, if anything, can give hope to someone like my mother, but to all of our families. It's what artificial intelligence is able to do, because think about what it's able to look at that no human could see. That's why it's becoming so involved in radiology and so involved in healthcare in such an amazing way. We cannot muff that up because we simply are not going to teach it manners. And think of, again, I'm going to go back to it, if we had not taught the automobile manners. I don't believe we taught social media that. And I definitely don't think we want to go down that route with AI. It's too darn important. And that's why I really love what I do. And I love what Pinnacle's doing, because it feels like we're driving a purpose that's ultimately, when I say it, I think AI needs us to do some thinking for it.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up. I'd love to continue the conversation. Let's find some time to dive a little bit deeper, but hopefully there's some takeaways for the audience. And as always, I truly appreciate the time. Appreciate you joining us on Perspectives of Pinnacle, and I look forward to the next conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks so much.
Pinnacle is your partner in the business of healthcare. Nationally recognized for helping clients manage risk, improve performance, and drive innovation. For more information, visit our website, askphc.com.